It's exactly 2:45, just like we planned it. We got all the tech finished just in time. Hi everybody, welcome to the Excelsior Remembering Stanley panel. I'm Danny Fingeroth. I was a writer and editor at Marvel for years. I worked with Stan for decades on many projects and convention panels, and worked on many of the characters that he co-created. And astonishingly, I have a biography of Stan coming out next month called, yes, Jim, thank you. There'll be a bigger picture of it on the screen there. It's called The Marvelous Life, The Amazing Story of Stan Lee. And these gentlemen have been kind enough to join me to celebrate Stan on what's a little about 11 months since he passed away. Everybody on the panel, including we'll be here in a minute, TODD McFARLANE, worked with Stan in various capacities. I will give you a quick rundown of who's who, but then they will tell you more about what they do in their relationship to Stan. Michael USLAN, at the end, is the executive producer of all the Batman movies, including something called Joker. Is that about playing cards? Is that like a how-to on bridge or something?
Yeah, pretty much.
Pretty much. So Michael is the bridge expert on the panel. Michael USLAN. Dennis Kitchen, who had the easiest job of getting here since there was a spotlight panel on Dennis just before this, which you should have come in here. You could have gotten a better seat. But Dennis will be kitchen sink press and publications, and worked with Stan on a interesting hybrid underground, above ground comic venture he'll tell us about. Paul LEVITZ, Paul LEVITZ did a bunch of stuff at DC Comics.
Stalker. Something had to clean up.
Okay, right, there you go. President, publisher, writer of Legion of Superheroes, Dr. Fate, a million other things that I'm blanking on, but you probably have his stuff in plastic bags somewhere in a vault where you will waiting for them to appreciate even more in value. So Paul LEVITZ. Jim SALICRUP, longtime editor at Marvel, including of working on some character named Spidey and the Avengers and the Fantastic Four, and the author of the Sledgehammer comic book and of the Marvel toilet paper.
Hold your applause to the end.
I'm currently running Paper Cuts Publishers, fine comics and graphic novels for children and adults of all ages. TODD McFARLANE will be here any minute, and he doesn't get an introduction since he's tardy. Anyway, I'm going to go through a little bit of Stan's history, although I have a feeling if you're here, you probably know a lot of what he did. And what you don't know will be in my book. But that's Stan, how somebody goes through a little history of Stan, and then each of the panelists will have their chance to expand on their own relationship. That's how many people of the baby boomer generation first saw Stan. It was the inside cover to Fantasy Masterpieces #1, which was a reprint comic that had some of the comics of the pre-superhero Marvels that were drawn by Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko and Joe Sinnott and Don Heck. That was everybody's impression of Stan for maybe 5 years. Basically, Frank Sinatra with a comic book in his hand. And the amount of word balloons is kind of appropriate. He did like to talk. Watch in these photos, watch the different Stan treatments of his hairline and the head in general. This is Stan early on. He started working at Time with Comix to become Marvel at age 17, but that was shortly before Pearl Harbor, and shortly after Pearl Harbor he enlisted, and here he is working in a office in the States, maybe I'm not sure if it's in Queens or Indiana. He worked he was stationed in several different places, but he worked on informational, instructional, morale boosting, propaganda. His most famous one, you can maybe see it in the background, is an anti-venereal disease campaign, which I believe he coined the phrase "VD, not me." And that's his actual hairline. Here he is. Now we're cutting to about to the mid-60s, where Stan is being given an award by the Philosophic Club of Princeton University, which clearly Stan has no idea who they are, or why they're there. The guy on the extreme right and the second from the left, they're the twin Chulenko brothers, who had organized the society. And you can see in the back there's a famous bust of Stan's wife, Joan, which actually was lost in a fire in California years later. This is Stan showing off a cover of Strange Tales. It looks like a Steranko. Anybody tell? Steranko cover. Note the hair, not the updated toupee for the early 60s. Yet another, here's a hipster Stan in the late 60s with the beard, and another variant on the hairline. And here, flipping back in time a little, unless there's a stiff breeze, but there's Stan with Jack Kirby in one of their apparently better getting along modes. This is at a Cartoonist Society function in about 66, and I don't know who the other two guys are, but they're not Marvel connected at all, as far as I know. And as if you didn't know, here are the comics that Stan is best known for, co-creating with Jack Kirby the Fantastic Four, co-creating with Steve Ditko the Amazing Spider-Man, and co-creating with Al Jaffe, Ziggy Pig, and Silly Seal, who took the world by storm. TODD McFARLANE, ladies and gentlemen. And so now I will turn it over to our panelists, starting with Michael. Tell us about some of your relationship with Stan. As you with Stan, and there's a project that you and Stan worked on together.
Absolutely. But before I do that, I've got a very, very big announcement for you. That our next live action movie, thanks to Danny pointing out that Stan worked on venereal disease films, we're going to be doing Stan Lee's Captain VD. So you really don't want to miss that one.
In 3D.
In 3D VD. At the premiere of our first Batman movie in June 1989 in Los Angeles, every star in Hollywood was there, and Stan was there with his friend Bob Kane. And I could care less about the stars of Hollywood. I got to hang out with Stan Lee, with Bob Kane. And Stan was just giving it to Bob that night. And he said, you know, Bob, if I had been the guy who had written Batman with you, I really could have made a success of this thing. So Bob gave it right back and said, well, you know, Stan, if I had been the one drawing Spider-Man, maybe you could have had a movie. And I'm in between these two guys. I'm going, wait a minute, Stan Lee creating Batman, what would that have been like if he did that at Marvel? And what if he created Superman and Wonder Woman and Justice League? So years later, I was lucky enough to have an old pal who was now president of DC Comics, a guy by the name of Paul LEVITZ. And went to Paul one day and said, what would you think if we brought Stan over to DC Comics to kind of reimagine and reinvent the DC superheroes? And he said to me, I think this would be the most fun that I could imagine. So I went back to Stan, I said, what do you think if we brought you over to DC to recreate all these superheroes? He said, oh, come on, Michael, they'll never go for it. That'll be like bringing Henry Ford to GM and asking him to design a car. Or bringing the president of Coke over to do the Pepsi challenge and have him pick Pepsi. It just won't work. And I said, well, I think, Stan, it can. And we began to talk about it with Paul, and we created Stan Lee's Just Imagine series. What if he had been at DC? And what was important to Stan was that nobody should consider that he was trying to better what had been created. This was an homage, and he was having fun with it, but it was an homage to really all of his friends who had originally created all of these characters. Well, I happened to be lucky enough to be in Stan's office in LA the day the artwork for this first Superman book came in, and it came in from Big John Buscema. It would turn out to be John's final work. He passed away shortly thereafter. And as Stan was showing me the original artwork right out of the envelope, he goes, "Look how beautiful this is. Look how gorgeous this is. Look, wait a minute." And he picked out one page. He said, "This page is all wrong. It's supposed to be Superman flying right at the audience, and he's got to have his arms extended and his chest out." Oh, John missed it completely. He goes, "Here, Michael, take this art." He then took a piece of tissue paper and took tape and put it over it, and he handed me a pen. He said, "Draw the panel borders." And I'm drawing the panel borders. He said, "All right, here's what I want you to draw. We're going to show John how to do this." And I said, "Stan, I can doodle," but he goes, no, you'll be fine. Do this." And he stood on his couch, and he put one foot on the end table, knocking over a lamp in the process, has his arms outstretched. He goes, "Okay, Michael, draw this." And I'm thinking, I had read stories of how he used to do this with Ditko and Kirby. I'm going, holy shit, I'm freaking Jack Kirby. This is amazing. And of course, we made the one change in that particular page, but I had the chance to work as the Jack Kirby artist with Stan Lee, and that was maybe my greatest fanboy, total geek moment that I've ever experienced.
Thank you, Michael. Let's go to Dennis. So Dennis, you worked on some crazy scheme with Stan, didn't you? Who's that guy on the left, by the way?
Yeah, that's an embarrassing photo.
You ever been a toupee?
Is this working?
Yeah.
Yeah, 1973, those of you who know the underground comics movement, we had a bit of a slump. We call it the crash of 73. And Stan and I had been pen pals since 1969 and having great fun, and he several times offered me a chance to work in the bullpen, and I always said no, because I was having more fun with my own thing. But suddenly in 1973, I was panicking, and I thought, well, this is a good time to talk to Stan. I flew to New York, and we worked out an arrangement where I would do a magazine called Comix Book, spelled with an X. And what Stan wanted was all the energy of the underground, but with Marvel's distribution and marketing, and plug it into the mainstream. And he was eager to seem hip and with it, and so he made a lot of concessions that he later regretted, things that Marvel never did before. He agreed to let us keep our copyrights. He allowed us to retain our own original art, and gave us pretty much open editorial reign, and came to regret all of it, because we came out with it, and very quickly the other artists in the bullpen understandably said to Stan, why are you giving these hippies a better deal than you're giving us? And I think he probably stammered a lot and couldn't really explain it, other than it didn't technically have the Marvel seal on it. It was without a brand. But Stan was still the guy in charge. And the first issue, when I was putting it out, I said to him, what's your title? Are you the publisher? Are you the editor-in-chief? And he said, let me think about it. We got right down to the deadline where it had to go to the printer, and the last thing to paste up, when we literally pasted up, was Stan's title. And I said, Stan, you got to tell me what's your title. And he said, I've been thinking about it then. He said, I'll tell you what, put down that I'm the instigator. Because he said, that way, if you do something great and it helps Marvel and it makes me look good, I can say I instigated that thing. But if you embarrass me and cause shame, he said, I could say all I did was instigate it. I want to tell one other quick story that wasn't direct, but it's one of my favorites from the 1940s when you may know Harvey Kurtzman was doing filler pages called Hey Look. And he was a freelancer, he was starving, and Stan would give him these assignments that paid very little. A filler in those days was if they didn't sell an ad for that page, they'd stick this filler in, and it was called Hey Look, and it was brilliant. But he was just barely getting by. And a young woman named Adele Hassan just graduated from a school upstate New York, Cortland, I think, teaching school. She was looking for a job, answered an ad for a publisher's right-hand girl, as they called her, Girl Friday. And Stan hired her, and she did a variety of secretarial tasks. And one day he said to her, we're running an ad in our magazines, and we're going to give kids $1 if they win. We'll pull their names out of a hat, but what it really is, I want to find out what their favorites are. They're going to vote on what their favorites are. And so basically, they had this marketing experiment, and he said, Adele, you count all the ballots that come in. She loved Hey Look. And when Harvey would come to the office, sometimes she'd flirt with him, and when the ballots actually started coming in, she realized nobody's voting for him. He's so funny. So she stuffed the ballot box, took the results to Stan, and Stan said, we gotta give that kid more work. And that's how Harvey started getting regular work, evolved into what became Mad Magazine. So.
Dennis, I want to ask you, what is that illustration? What's the origin of that?
Oh, we did a collection a few years ago, the Best of Comix Book, and that's Pete Poplaski's caricature of me and Stan at the time. And that's a signature plate.
Very cool. And everybody has different hair than any other time.
It's a caricature.
Yeah,
Tell everyone what happened to Adele herself.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't really finish the story. Adele then saw Harvey more often, flirted more often, and they ended up getting married.
So she was the real contest winner. I'm going to skip past Jim for a minute. Wait. No, I got to go backwards to. Don't anybody have a feature? Paul, here's you, Stan. He seems to be helping you promote your DC Comics book.
It was indeed that
you are
night.
with some oddball dressed like a bat. What's your
That was
favorite Stan memory?
That was a book party for my Taschen book, and Stan was kind enough to come out and join the party and help celebrate it. I have to add on to Michael's story of the Batman premiere and sort of the ironic nature of it. As Michael said, Stan was there as Bob's date that evening. They were both graduates of the same high school. Stan a bunch of years after Bob, but Bob was lording over him. And Stan's one request in the course of the evening was if he could possibly get a cameo in one of these Batman movies. Didn't think we could work that one out, but I think he got to do a couple of cameos somewhere along the line.
Teen Titans go to the movies.
Guy had some fun. I didn't get to know Stan in my early days, either in fandom or my first years working in comics, because I was a little too young, a little too junior in the process. But in the later years after he moved to California, he would occasionally come back and be involved with Marvel in some project or another, and sometimes they'd trot him out as a spokesperson for something that we were doing, like a Marvel DC crossover, and I get to spend time with him on that. Once or twice we ended up on the same flight back and forth to California and having a conversation there. And along the way, somehow, despite a 30-odd year difference in our ages, he started treating me as a friend and a peer, which was just kind of amazing. I made it to the second time at his house before bringing along my bound volume of Avengers 1-16 and saying, I'll be a grown-up at dinner, Stan, with you and Joni, but right now you're signing this for 12-year-old Paul. It remains one of my treasured possessions in my collection. On one of those occasions, though, we were at dinner at Hamburger Hamlet, basic junkie place in Los Angeles, and
You don't mean heroin addicts hung out there. That's not what you meant by a junkie place.
not that kind.
Okay.
That's Dennis's variety. I'm a little classier, slightly. We could have gone to McDonald's, but Stan liked a better meal than that.
Burger King.
So the avatar was off. I really describe Stan in terms of both the avatar that was very natural to him, certainly by the time I knew him, but that you've all seen both on the movies, the TV shows, any convention panel, and sort of the inner Stan, which didn't show up very often, mostly when Joan was around because she wouldn't take any of the crap. But that evening, the avatar came down for a few minutes, and Stan said, you know, the Marvel guys are asking me to do some new editorial work. I don't remember what year it is or which group of Marvel guys this was, probably the 1990s somewhere. What's an editor do these days, Paul? I said, well, you know, to all intents and purposes, Stan, I haven't been an editor almost as long as you haven't been an editor. He stopped working on the editorial side of Marvel the early 1980s somewhere. I stopped being a line editor in 80 or 81. So, but, you know, being an editor at its heart is about getting people to do their best work, right? And we had a lovely 5-minute back and forth about some of the editors we knew, mutually praising Archie Goodwin as one of the best editors we'd ever worked with, and neither of us understanding how the hell Archie did it. And then Stan sort of shrugged in, not mock humility, but genuine humility, and said, but I wasn't much of an editor, I just wrote all the stuff. And I laughed a little bit. I said, Stan, I got to work with all the same artists you got to work with. Let's leave Jack and Steve out of it as unique cases, even though your work with them was the best work of their careers in the opinion of many. But let's talk about Don Heck and Dick Ayers. You know, lovely, lovely professional men, a delight to work with. Neither of them ever turned in a really bad job. The only editor who ever managed to get either of them to do anything beyond professional was you. I got them to do competent work. I'm not embarrassed by it, but it was nothing like what they did for you. And he smiled, and the avatar started sneaking back a little bit. And he said, Dick, I remember Dick. I had him doing some Western. I don't remember which Western. But every time I would send him a script, he'd call up and say, okay, Chief, what do you want me to do with this one? And the full avatar came on. He wasn't doing it deliberately. This was just Stan being Stan. Well, Dick, it's a Western, so I want to see the hoofs flashing and the spurs shining. And I was breaking out laughing in the middle of the restaurant, just laughing at him. I said, that's it, Stan. When Dick came in to pick up a job with me, he'd take out the little notebook from his pocket, he'd tick off 3 pages a day, say, I'll be back on the 19th for the next one. Will you have something ready for me, Paul? And I'd say, yes, Dick, I can keep you busy. And he'd give me some candy that his wife had brought from the Lifesavers factory where she worked. And we had a lovely moment or two together, and he went off and he did professional, fine stuff. But when he was working for you, you got him excited. And that's how you were a great editor. You were able to find the buttons to push on each of these people. And that's a wonderful trick that I wish I had learned a few years before, when it might have done me some good as an editor.
Thank you, Paul. Again, this is you and me and Stan at, this was the Stan retrospective at the old Mocha.
Right.
And I guess Ken Long and Peter Sanderson, who were in the room, were the guys who curated this.
Yeah.
So this is a great show that Stan took everybody on a tour through, and then here's you and Stan a few years later. And then this was when you were editor of Marvel Age. What did this issue consist of? And of course, what are your best Stan memories?
Most people think that's a photo of Stan. It's actually J.J. Jackson did a painting, and in my whole goal was that she turned it into a full color picture of him, but because she had a black and white photo as reference, so you know, things don't always work out the way you want, but this showed up a lot. Like Paul, I had a couple more stories to add to Michael Uslan's thing. They're quick, don't worry, Danny. Another Hollywood premiere. It was another Hollywood premiere, and there was a point there where Jim Cameron was in talks with Marvel to do a Spider-Man movie. So, you know, everyone in Hollywood, they're all such friendly folks. So Stan was invited to the premiere of the Titanic. And, you know, he was on the red carpet and all that, and then when Cameron saw Stan, he called him over, and they had his arm around him, and Stan was, you know, couldn't believe all the photographers were taking photos, et cetera, et cetera. And he relayed this story to one of his other friends and comics writer, Scott Lobdell. And Stan was saying, I couldn't believe the attention I was getting. And Scott, being Scott, said, they all thought you were one of the last survivors of the Titanic. That was Scott Lobdell. I was at Stanley Media when he was doing the Just Imagine, Superman, etc. And I remember he was in all his glory because, you know, comic book editors, you know, like they have this crazy idea that they should actually edit things. And, you know, after the deal was made with DC, you know, Stan really was working on these. You know, he would write up the outlines and look at the artwork, like Michael was saying, and do the script. And at some point, I think some of the DC editors wanted to be helpful and offer Stan some guidance. And I think I was in that meeting, you know, DC didn't know. I was on Stan's side, it was a phone conference. And Stan, like, had his feet up on his desk, and he was politely and patiently listening to, I don't know whether it was you or Mike Carlin, were trying to explain to him, like, you know, offering just little suggestions, and Stan being Stan, who, one of his traits was he was incredibly impatient, and once he did something, he certainly didn't want to change it for anybody. So he would just actually patiently listen to all the suggestions, and then he'd say, those are all great suggestions, but the name of it is Just Imagine if Stan Lee did Superman, not if Mike Uslan did Superman or Mike Carlin did Superman, so it has to be me. They couldn't talk about it that.
That is the greatest voice impersonation of Stan I have ever heard.
Well, Jim, weren't you Stan's evil twin?
Well, that leads into my story. After coming from the Bronx and, you know, being what probably Kirby would call somewhat of a smart alecky kid at times, one of the things kids did, you know, when you were in school, you did imitations of your teachers, et cetera, et cetera. You know, the trick was not to get caught at it. And after 20 years at Marvel, and I remember, you know, I started when I was 15, and it really was a dream come true, coming from the projects of the, you know, Bronx River housing projects, and suddenly winding up in the hallowed halls of Marvel was unbelievable. I couldn't believe I was there. And all these people were my gods and heroes, and I loved every second of it. But 20 years later, after, you know, having some a little success coming out with a Spider-Man title with some guy down the end there, yeah, it was, you know, getting to be time to move on and do more stuff on my own. And there was a lot of regrets because I figured, you know, there's a pretty good chance I won't be working with, you know, Stan ever again. So it's pretty sad. So no one was more surprised than me a few years later to get a call from Stan to work at a new company. Like, this is unthinkable. You know, Marvel, you know, it's not quite as unthinkable as Stan writing for DC, but he had a new company called Stanley Media, and he invited me out there. And one of the, basically it was a company that was really ahead of its time in both a good way and a bad way. the good ways, that they were sort of like a superhero YouTube, and they were creating little videos of all these new characters Stan was creating. The bad way is when everyone still had dial-up. So they'd create a little 2-3 minute cartoon with these new superheroes, and it would take 3 hours to download the damn thing. So, you know, being ahead of your time is not always a plus. But it all came from a website, and he hired me to be his senior writer-editor. And I sort of was working on a lot of the stuff that was not those the new characters. But, you know, we had all sorts of crazy filler. I would write things like the Stan Lee trivia quiz, and I found this to be insightful, so I'll share it with you. One of the questions, which I just thought was absurd, was, what did Stan have for lunch today? And I had asked him, what he had, and I wrote it down. It was like, I think it was cheese and crackers or something like that. But when I gave it to Stan for his approval, he changed it to 2 hot dogs and a Pepsi. So, don't ask me why. Anyhow, one of the filler characters he created, it wasn't one of the superheroes, was originally called Stan 2.0, a clone of himself. And he wrote the first ones. Do you have the picture of it?
No.
Oh, sorry. Anyway, it was a cartoon version of Stan. And Stan was very busy running around the world, wheeling and dealing, trying to raise money for this new company of his. And he had read the first few, and he'd done the voice for it. But then he started getting too busy to do it. So, they turned it over to me to write. I, started calling it Stan's Evil Clone, and he was still editing it. He said, he was very careful he didn't want me to have his evil clone actually do anything evil, because particularly if we were making fun of Hollywood stars or anything like that, he said, I may have to work with them. So he was reluctant. But even though I was writing it, he did the voice, but then he got even more busy, and the company, I wasn't in this meeting, they were having a production meeting. They were thinking Stan can't do the voice anymore, we're going to have to hire an actor. And some of the people in that production meeting said, Jim does a Stan impression. Now, I'd never done that for Stan before. Sort of always carefully did it when he was not around. So then I was called in and had to audition for Stan. And he liked it. So I got to do it. So in the tradition of his old early 60s Monsters comics, I could say, I was Stan Lee's evil clone. And one of the things that happened as I was working on it, writing it, and it was weird, different parts of your brain react differently. So when I was doing the voice, I'd look at the scripts and think, who wrote this crap? And it was me. But anyhow, I was doing it and having a lot of fun. And I never thought I was a method actor or anything crazy like that. But you get into the mindset of writing these things, which is such a surreal thing to be working and getting paid to make fun of your boss. And I remember I was in a meeting with Stan, and he was behind his desk, and there was someone else beside me, and I think at some point there was maybe a slight difference of opinion, and Stan, came to my defense and said, Jim's right, and without thinking, because I've been in this Stan mindset for so long, and writing him and talking like him, I instantly said, of course I'm right, I wouldn't have said it unless I was right. And then suddenly, Stan looked at me, and everything seemed to stop. It was as if I had Ant-Man's powers, and I suddenly started shrinking. And Stan, I don't think he ever did this intentionally or for any other reason than to raise his glasses up. But he was staring at me, then he raised his glasses up. and rather thoughtfully and reflectively said, you know, what you just said sounded a lot like something I would have said. And now I understand why people think I'm obnoxious.
Thank you, Jim. And now we come to Todd McFarlane. Todd, I hear that you have something going on today where you're going to get a Guinness Stout or some kind of... Todd's getting an award for the longest running independently produced comic, I believe, from the Guinness World Records people.
It's creator-owned. Corporations can own independent companies. It's creator-owned.
Creator-owned.
I'm big on creator. So
at 5:45 today.
5:45. You want to see it? I'm going to bring some people up there, but
okay.
let's go back to our panel here.
Okay.
So my perspective is obviously slightly different than the good gentleman up here. I had 3 phases of my time with Stan, of which he was unaware of the first phase, and each one became a little bit longer. The first phase, and it's a story I've told plenty of times, I think it's worth repeating, is 16-year-old Todd McFarlane just slightly beginning to even think that it's a dream that you could even get into comic books, is down in Florida. I'm Canadian. Is down in Florida for a baseball tournament. I thought I was going to be an athlete. And there happened to be a comic book convention at that hotel. I walked down there, said, hey, Mom, Dad, I'll be back in an hour. And there were a couple people that were in, and the convention was essentially about as big as this room you're sitting in right now. That was a sort of a typical comic convention. You got the ballroom and you had 10, 12 tables. And then they would put some of the artists inside and a couple outside. And outside were some of them. And at one of the tables was Stan Lee. Now, 16-year-old Todd, at this point, this was royalty to me, right? And here's why. Every comic book that I bought from Marvel, when you open the page, the first line you read on every Marvel comic book says Stan Lee presents. Right? Stan Lee presents. Every book, it didn't matter who was drawing it, who was writing it, who the character was, Stan Lee present. And so I didn't really know what that meant. It just meant that it was like this god, this pope of comic books that was up here. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's Stan Lee. That's that guy on every comic book is sitting right there. And I casually went up to him and said, hey, Mr. Lee, do you mind if I ask you a couple questions? And without batting an eye, and this is the thing that I found out later that was so impactful to me, but I found out later as I hung out with him more and more, it was just something he did for so many more people. But for me, in that moment, I said, Mr. Lee, is it okay if I ask you a couple questions? Because I was thinking about getting into comic book. And he instantly pulled a chair next to him and said, sit down, my son. Right? And he let me sit next to him for about 4 or 5 hours till the con was over. And I just, whenever there wasn't anybody in front of him, now again, we're going back to the mid-70s, right? I'm going to age myself just like we all have done so far. It wasn't the same Stan Lee that you guys know, right? His big stardom doesn't come till later. So he had an okay line, but it was sporadic. And they were trying to go get sort of the young, hipper artists that were around. So there was a lot of gaps there, so I was able to pepper him, and he just politely answered every single one of them, that when I went home, it was one of the big moments of my life that I go, wow, I now have knowledge, and I've got some inspiration. Maybe there's a chance, right? Now, there's no reason why Stan would have any recollection of that day, right? We all have these moments where our parents, friends, neighbors, somebody says and does something that are crystal clear in our minds, but they have no recollection. For me, that was a moment, right? So, fast forward, that's mid-70s. Fast forward, the next phase comes right when we are starting Image comic books, right? Now, I'm riding high in my career. I'm obviously coming off Spider-Man. Spider-Man's doing good. Let me also say, without sort of detouring too far, I don't think it's a coincidence that I've dealt with a handful of good, skilled editors in my life. That the best editor I ever had was Jim SALICRUP, who's sitting down here. And so it's true, it's true. and him, like it said, some of that notoriety that he had with Stan, I believe rubbed off. I got to deal with Paul too. Paul was a gracious man too. So I think there was a little bit of the rub that sort of shined through, and I just happened to be the lucky recipient of being able to get some of it, sometimes in an indirect way, that there was some Stan in all of them that was still being pushed to some of the artists and writers that they were dealing with. We start Image Comic Books, and this is what this photo is here. And when we start Image Comic Book, we do this line of videos, VHSs. I think people have downloaded them on YouTube. I forget what they were called, something like
It's called the comic book. Stan Lee presents the comic book greats.
That's it. Stan Lee presents the comic book greats. So if you look it up, there's a handful of them, and he went through different people. And so I did a couple with him, and they were fun to do. Had tons of energy. But think about it from my perspective. I know that I have this run that's going pretty well in Spider-Man, but I've changed a few things, right? Just because it was who I was, and I got to do something here. And so now I'm going to get up close to the guy who helped co-create this character. You could argue that that's blasphemy, right? You're now going to meet the person, and I remember the first time we were doing the shooting, I was super nervous of going, uh-oh, now I got to meet my maker, right? Because here's the guy who created Spider-Man. And again, without batting an eye, he goes, hey, Todd. And I bumped into him a couple times before, but again, reiterated, hey, Todd, I remember you. You did that stuff on Spider-Man, and it was great. And I'm glad you did that, and it was wonderful stuff. And I just hope that whatever you're going to be doing now with this new company, I hope that you're just as successful. And one of the things that he did in that moment, that he just kept repeating, is that I never heard, these gentlemen may have a different sort of perspective, I never ever heard him say anything that was not encouraging. That I'm not trying to move you forward. I'm not thinking that whatever we were going to do tomorrow, what any creator that he met was going to do tomorrow, was always going to be the best thing, right? I never heard him say, well, in my day, right, or this is how we did it. He wouldn't do any of that. He'd just go, oh, what you're doing is wonderful. And I saw him talking to other creative people. I also saw in that time him talking to individuals. Phase 3 comes along. I mean, again, at this point now, I know Stan. I call him a decent acquaintance. And we would sort of be able to spend time with each other at convention. And then phase 3 comes along. And phase 3 comes along, and for whatever reason, I got asked to introduce him or go up and make some big speeches for him at some important moments in his life. And I did one such one. It was, I think Paramount was given a private screening of the first Iron Man movie for Stan in Las Vegas, and they said, hey, can you come up and basically MC it? And for whatever reason, Stan was so enamored with what happened, he wanted me to be his professional introducer, right? It's kind of cool, right? And he's going, what? And so at this point, just so you guys know, he which was interesting about that day was his hearing was gone. And he was a stubborn man with not wanting to get a hearing aid. And so he just went, that was wonderful at the end. I'm like, okay, it was sort of polite. And I'm like, didn't think anything about it. And then it was the next day they phoned and they went, oh my God, Stan was super enamored with it. And he wants you to do more of this with them. And I went, wow, it didn't seem like he was that excited. And it's like, no, he couldn't hear shit. So what they had to do was they recorded it, took him upstairs, put it in. Remember, they used to have the VCR machines in the hotel room? And then he had to sit close to it with the volume up, and then he actually got to hear everything. Oh my God, that was wonderful what was going on that day. So he asked me, if you go back like to this one right here, so this becomes another one of these moments here. This, I believe, is from when Stan gets his Walk of Fame star, right? And so the importance of this day for Stan obviously was huge. But for me, the pride of not only being able to have the honor to bring him up on stage, but that of all those, and I don't know how many people have ever had a chance to walk on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Do we have a show of hands who've been able to walk? Yeah, it's kind of spectacular. Of all those stars, of all those names, none of them throughout time, up to this moment, came from the comic book industry. Matter of fact, very few even came from publishing. It was, you know, the entertainment, music sort of genres that people and mediums that people were doing. And I remember this day just standing back going, he did it for us. He carried the flag across and he legitimized comic books to the world here. At least for me, it was my world. And going, wow, we've got a star that is a comic book guy. I don't even think Stan really understood, right? And maybe it wasn't that big a deal. He was probably humble like he was and did his goofy stuff and he got up there that day and did whatever. But I just went, man, here we come. The movies are coming. The TV shows are coming. We now fast forward 2019, you see what's happening out here. Like it's all legit. Geekdom is legit. It wasn't quite there yet, and he just put a flag in it. I was so filled with pride. What ended up happening afterwards, you got some of the other photos there, is that I would go up on stage with Stan, and we would do this sort of Laurel and Hardy, Batman and Robin. It was this shtick that we used to do. And I had a lot of fun with them. It was good, and I was always the butt of 1,000 jokes. And to the point that my wife and kids came one time. I live in Phoenix. They came to one, and when at the end of it, everybody else was laughing, and they left and go, "He's not very nice to you, is he?" Right? She goes, and I'm like, no, it's the shtick. This is how it works. Is it? And they're like, "Gee, I thought you'll flood, Dad." And I'm like, no, it works. It works good. And so we did it over and over and over and over and over. But here's what I saw in all those times. I've probably been on stage with Stan arguably more than any other human being, right? Because from that moment on. Because his hearing was bad. So he goes, "Todd, I need an interpreter." Essentially, I can't hear the questions from the audience. I need you to hear the question and then feed it to me in a way that it doesn't sound like I can't hear it, right? So when somebody said, "You like Thor?" I'm going, "Oh, that's cool." And it's like, "Yeah, Stan, you've created a lot of characters, and like, why is Thor so cool?" Right? And so I would just reiterate it in a way that he could go, "Oh, the question must have been about Thor," because he couldn't hear it. One day, I kept asking him the simple question, "Why don't you just get a damn hearing aid," right? But he was like, "No, I can't do this because I'm Stan." And so there was one time we were in San Diego, and it was a Stan Lee panel. It wasn't a Todd Stan shtick panel. It was a Stan Lee panel. But he's like, "Todd, I got to have an MC. Can you MC it again?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure." And it was this big panel. And it was this whole giant stage, and you know the ones where it's like got thousands of people and you've got the pitch, because you can't see them, they put it and project it up on the wall or on the big screen. And so I'm going, cool. And so I'm way over to the side, like Danny is over there, and the whole stage is over there, and it's Stan, and it's crazy, and they're going crazy, and we start going, and I'm not really paying attention, and after about 15 minutes, Stan has slowly made his way, and now he's standing right next to me. Which is problematic because the camera couldn't move that far. So the screen was empty. So I'm like sitting there going, Stan, you got to get back on camera. And he's like, "I can't hear a damn thing, Tom." I was like, well then let's both walk out there, because there are people in the back that can't see anything, and they're staring at a blank screen, and we got to go, right? And so we would just do it. Eventually, ding, 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 he got a hearing aid, and all of a sudden he's like, "Oh my God, I can hear everything, Tom," right? And so his stubbornness eventually paid off. Here's what I also saw. The Stan Lee that any of you, if you ever had the good fortune to ever see him, how many people ever saw Stan in person, right? Like the Stan Lee that you saw talking to you or on stage was essentially the same Stan Lee, at least at that advanced stage, off the stage. He almost didn't turn it off, I have to tell you. Like he would just go. He would come and help pick me up when I landed in the plane, and we'd get in the taxi and we'd have like a 45-minute drive to the convention, and he would just go. He was just on the whole time. It was almost like we were on stage. He's like, "Why are you here, Todd? I don't really need you. I can do this on my own, and you're so much handsomer than me." And it's like, I hate it. I wish you were more ugly. And he would just go for 45 minutes. Sometimes I'd actually record it to just go, "Oh my God, he just is going to go for 45 minutes." And then he would just walk on stage and keep doing it, right? And keep doing it. So when people go, "Oh, we went up there and he did the act," it wasn't. I'm here to tell you it was sincere. That was Stan. Like they said it, Stan being Stan, it's absolutely true. The other piece that I admired of this man, one of the great superpowers is this man had, and I don't know how great his writing was or how good and how much and hard work. Here's what I saw from him. Because of my close proximity to him, I saw him interact with thousands and thousands and thousands of fans. And he understood the magic, just like some of the good people here, and maybe some of you people here, or some of you who hopefully will see it, of interacting with your fans. And there are times when you get popular when you have 20 seconds, 30 seconds. And in that 30 seconds, you must make it as important as possible for that human being. Because that person in front of you, that's their 30 seconds. I know from this side of the table, we're going to be here for an hour, but that's their 30 seconds. And he understood, almost more than any celebrity I've ever been around, that 30 second is the most important 30 seconds. And he had to do it over and over and over and over, 30 seconds, every time, every time, every time. And it went something like this. Hey, how's your convention going? It's great. Oh, I like the cut of your jib. Oh, that's great. How are you doing? Oh, yeah, you have a wonderful time. Let me get a signature. You go. And the next one. Hey, how are you? And he had to do it over. And he did it with a smile. And he did it. And then we would be off stage. Or we would be behind the screens. And he got as much joy out of you as you got out of him. I'm telling you this to be the truth. He would look at me more than once. This happened multiple times. And he would say to me, we'd be in the green room, or whatever you want to call it, and he goes, can you believe it? Can you believe the wonderful weekend we're having? Isn't this great? Isn't this fantastic? This is wonderful. Who would have thunk, Todd? Who would have thought that this could happen to us? He's 90, he's in his 90s, and he's still thinking about why me, right? Why me? So as much as he would tell his stories and regale you and do all the entertainment, he would sit back and just get as much back from you, right? So there was two great loves in Stan Lee's life, right? And it was very simplistic for him. He would go to the shows, and you guys just fed him. And he would do it, he'd hope he entertained you, and then you would feed him, and it was like, this is just great, Todd. And then he would go home to his wife, Joni. And that was his warm blanket. His wife was everything for him. She passed away shortly before their 70th anniversary. 70. If you guys don't understand how long 70 is, then let me do the math for you, right? Meet somebody at 20, fall head over heels at 20, and now start climbing some mountains. 1, stay in love for 70 years. There's one mountain. 2, that means you don't get a divorce. 3, neither one of you can get sick for 70 years. And there's a lot of diseases out there that can touch you. And if you can do all that and put it all together, you can get to 70. And they just came a little bit short before somebody came and took Joni. So one of his great loves got taken away from him. And so for a while, he thought he wasn't going to go do shows. And as she was sort of near her death, she just said, no, go out there, the people love you. Do this for me. Go out. So he went and did it again, and he kept going, because he knew Joni wanted to do it. But I know I could see when he went back home that Joni's absence made a difference. And so I've sort of said that I'm sure they did an autopsy on Stan, that he died of a broken heart. His love of his life wasn't there. Eventually, his hearing went, and then his eyesight, right? So then he couldn't go to shows. Because I remember going to visit him. And the two things that he cared about was his shows and his wife. And he had no wife, and he couldn't see, and he couldn't hear, so he couldn't go to shows. And it's when he finally returned to me, and he'd go, Tom, I just want to see Joni. I just want to go see Joe. And it broke my heart. I'm sorry, it broke my heart that this man, up till 6 months prior to that, had so much energy. I mean, at 93 and a half, he still seemed like he was 55. And I go, wow, and I've been around him, and I heard it, and I heard it was like the first time that I ever heard him not have the energy. And I went, oh my gosh, he's a 90-year-old man. We forgot, because he gave us so much, he gave us so much energy. And so I'm hoping that he got his last wish, right? I know he adored all of you, and he gave us all a bunch of stories. Besides, he gave us all those characters, right? He gave us a lot more. Who the hell goes out on top at 94? Who's that human being? Right?
Todd, thank you. Thank you. A few ways to follow that up. Obviously, time is running short. This was a surreal experience I had editing Stan on Spider-Man and having him go either, yeah, that's a great idea, or no, I don't agree. That was a total surreal experience of Stan not going, hey, I'm Stan, just print it, but actually being a professional. That was the first time he'd written a Spider-Man story outside the newspaper strip in about 12 years. I don't know if I did as many shows as Todd did with Stan, but we did a lot of Wizard World panels where I'll tell you this. I'm going to go a few minutes over. This is not that big, but one of the shows, Stan had a bad reaction to a flu shot. It was in the Wizard World in Sacramento, and he was a day late to the show. They sent a plane to get him, and I could see he was really feeling it. He was kind of just slumped over, waiting to go on, and when it became time to go on, he kind of dragged himself up the banister. And the president of Wizard had told people, well, Stan's not feeling well, he's had this reaction to a flu shot, so he's only going to do 20 minutes, not the usual hour. Hope you understand. And so Stan kind of perks up, and we're doing the the conversation, a couple of questions, and I say, Stan, as John told everybody, we're only doing a half panel because you're having that reaction to the flu shot, so is there anything you want to say to the folks in the audience before we finish up? And he looks at me and he says, is God talking to you? Did he say we have to stop? I feel great, let's keep going. Everybody backstage is flashing me signs what to do. I have no idea what any of it means. And so we just kept going. And that, I think, as Todd said, being on stage and connecting with fans just energized him and probably extended his life by a number of years. In tribute to Stan, I'm going to sell something. Here's my biography of Stan that's coming out next month. Stan told me in no uncertain terms, good luck with the book, but I'm not doing any interviews. 2 interviews later, he was very happy to do them. I was thrilled he did them. His interviews with 1 million other people. It's a story I could make Stan's life story. And I think what I would like to do is to end with a surprise cameo. It's not such a surprise anymore since everybody saw it. But when Al Jaffe, by the way, Al recently turned 98 and he just got onto social media. He's got his first Twitter feed going on. But when Al turned 95, a mere 95, a few years ago, I asked Stan if he would do a video birthday greeting, and this is it. So we will end with a cameo from Mr. Stan Lee.
I heard it was your 95th birthday. I can't believe it. It seems to me we were both a couple of kids when we were doing Silly Seal and Ziggy Pig. Silly Seal and Ziggy Pig. You know, those 2 characters have gained immortality. You walk up to anybody in the street and you say, Silly Seal and Ziggy Pig, and they immediately say, Al Jaffe and Stan Lee. And if you believe that, I have a bridge in Brooklyn to sell you. Nobody may remember them, but damn it, I thought they were great, and you did the most terrific job. Of course, you also did a lot of other stuff at Marvel. If I had a memory, I'd remember it. But I'm a little annoyed that you're older than I am. I thought I held the record, but you can't win them all. Anyway, I want you sure to have the happiest birthday. I want you to know that you were one of the cleverest, nicest guys who ever worked at Marvel. How we lost you to Mad, I'll never know, but you can't win them all. And maybe someday I'll get to New York and see you, or you'll come out here and see me. That wouldn't be bad. I think I still remember what you look like. I have no idea what the hell I look like. I don't even discouraging. But enjoy your 95th birthday. I suppose when you're 96, I'll have to, Fingeroth will let me know and I'll have to send you another video. When you're 97, I'll have to send you another one. Jesus Christ. The responsibilities I have, you wouldn't believe it. I should have written a speech that would have been clever instead of trying to ad-lib, and I feel like an idiot. So I'm going to sign up now before you tell people, boy, we thought that Stan had some talent. You should hear the dumb video he said. And I had to listen to the whole thing, thinking maybe there'll be something worth listening to as he goes along, but it kept getting worse. Anyway, happy birthday, Al, and all the best. And I really mean that. Excelsior.
So thank you, Stan. Thank you to the great panelists.